Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, in a small village, there lived a little girl known to all as Little Red Riding Hood. She earned this name because she always wore a bright red hooded cape that her grandmother had made for her. Little Red Riding Hood was a sweet and innocent girl who loved her family dearly. One sunny morning, her mother called her and said, "Little Red Riding Hood, your grandmother isn't feeling well. She's been quite sick, and I'm worried about her. Would you be a dear and take this basket of goodies to her? It has some freshly baked bread, sweet butter, and a pot of jam. Don't dawdle on the way, and stay on the path." Little Red Riding Hood happily agreed, taking the basket from her mother. She tied her red hooded cape tightly and set off through the forest, humming a tune as she went. The sun was shining, and all seemed well. As she walked through the forest, a sly wolf noticed Little Red Riding Hood. His eyes gleamed with mischief, and he hatched a wicked plan to trick her. He approached her and asked, "Where are you going, Little Red Riding Hood?" With her innocent heart, Little Red Riding Hood replied, "I'm going to visit my grandmother. She's not feeling well, and I'm bringing her some goodies." The wolf, now aware of the grandmother's house and the basket of goodies, thought of a way to reach there first. He said to Little Red Riding Hood, "Why don't you take your time and enjoy the beautiful flowers in the forest? I'll hurry to your grandmother's house and make sure she gets these gifts safely." Trusting the wolf's words, Little Red Riding Hood agreed, and she stopped to pick wildflowers. The wolf dashed off, reaching her grandmother's house much faster. The wolf, with a sly grin, knocked on the door. "Who is it?" the grandmother called from her sickbed. "It's Little Red Riding Hood, Grandma," the wolf replied, mimicking her voice. "I've brought you some treats." The grandmother, hearing the familiar voice, told him to come inside. The wolf, with his cunning disguise, entered the house and gobbled up the poor old woman. He then dressed in her nightgown, got into bed, and waited. Not long after, Little Red Riding Hood arrived at her grandmother's house. She knocked on the door and asked, "Grandma, it's me, Little Red Riding Hood. I've brought you some goodies." The wolf replied in a sweet voice, "Come in, dear." Little Red Riding Hood entered and was surprised to find her grandmother looking a bit different. "Grandma, what big ears you have," she said. "All the better to hear you with, my dear," replied the wolf. "Grandma, what big eyes you have," she continued. "All the better to see you with, my dear," said the wolf. "Grandma, what big teeth you have," Little Red Riding Hood said, becoming uneasy. "All the better to eat you with." And with that, the wolf leapt out of the bed and lunged at Little Red Riding Hood. Just in the nick of time, a nearby woodcutter heard the commotion and rushed in. He managed to save Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother, and the wolf fled into the forest. From that day on, Little Red Riding Hood learned never to trust strangers, no matter how familiar they might seem. She and her grandmother were grateful for the woodcutter's help, and they lived happily ever after, sharing the important lesson of being cautious in the woods.